Nick, Wagner, ESPN, couple of we get one, we don't get a lot of sites, we don't get a lot of on-field time with the 49ers. So when you do, you gotta like see what you can see. And a lot came out of the Thursday. There will be 2 days. You'll be out there 2 days this week. I guess the headline coming in the week will be, what do you think? Is Trent Williams here? Where is that on your headline list this week?
Oh man, I'm like the worst person to ask about headlines for OTAs, man. I'm so out on like the sweeping conclusions and generalizations that come out of this stuff in the spring. But I mean, I do think it's notable. It's notable that he's not there, but I think it's more notable who is here, which is, the vast majority of the team is there. And I thought it was interesting hearing Kyle Shanahan talk about how at the end of season meeting that he had with the team, he was advocating for, hey, like I understood why last year it was tough for you guys to come back because we had been through the grind and made it to the Super Bowl and it was a long season and then we were turning around, we were right back on the field. There's that excuse is gone this year. They don't have that. They had all of January off. George Kittle talked about what a pain that was, how much he disliked it. But clearly they have a lot of guys who have a sour taste in their mouth, and they should, because last year was bad. And so as for Trent Williams, I mean, I don't get the impression that there's anything significant there. I think it's just a matter of he's still trying to get all the way back in terms of his health from the foot slash ankle situation, that heel. I guess it was actually his heel technically. That kind of held him out at the end of the year last year. So if he's not here for the mandatory minicamp, then that's a whole different conversation. But I don't see any reason why he wouldn't be. Kyle Shanahan said he expects him back soon. I think that's the target date that he'll be here, and the fact that he has been here at least for part of the offseason program, I think would alleviate some concerns of if he's thinking about a retirement or anything like that. And I had conversations with him last year that indicated he's not thinking that way. So
I mean, that's a significant insight. I'm with you. Like, I thought it was interesting the way Kyle was pretty open about feeling like guys weren't ready last year. It does feel like there's all these little elements that have, like the Niners, it feels like 2025 is their opportunity to swing at a 3-0 pitch. Now, if you swing, you don't always hit a home run on a 3-0 pitch, but there are all these elements of everything that went wrong last year, the lack of rest coming into the season. The schedule is just, and nothing is, it's easy for us to sit here and be like, look how easy this, we were laughing at the end of last week. I was saying to Connor, our producer here, Connor, I was saying, like, we look at the Colts, like Daniel Jones and Anthony Richardson and Jonathan, I want to say Jonathan Taylor.
yeah.
That game could happen, and you're like, oh my God, those guys just ran for 215. Like anything could. So
Yeah.
it does feel like a lot has set up for the Niners this year to take their best shot at things.
Yeah, I mean, I think I'm with you. I'm not a big believer in using last year as a reference for this year when it comes to scheduling. But I will say, when you look at it on paper, that one way that you can do it is you use like the Vegas over under win projections as a way of like doing it, because that takes into account what happened in the offseason and some other things like that, and it still looks really easy for the most part. Now, there's probably going to be one or two teams on this schedule that are better than people expect. But the opposite is usually true too, right? There's usually one or two teams that people think might be pretty good that aren't very good. And so it has, in that way, I think there is some 2019 vibes a little bit here. And I say going into 2019, not necessarily where the 49ers ended up, but it's kind of that amalgamation of like things lining up in a right way. Because I'm sure you remember this guy. The 49ers were 7-0 or 8-0 or whatever it was that year, and they were trouncing teams, and people were still saying the Niners aren't very good. They haven't played anybody, right? And the reality ended up being that the Niners were one of those teams that people looked at before the season and said, oh, they're not going to be that good. And then they ended up being really good. And they also had a lot of things that just everything kind of came together and happened to go right for them. And I think that's going to kind of have to be what it is this year. If they're going to make some sort of a run, it's going to be a similar situation in which things line up in a good way and they get more production from their rookie class than you would have expected. There's a veteran or two or a young veteran or two who takes a bigger step forward than you might have expected. Those types of things. And Obviously, injury luck is always a big part of that. And that team had a pretty good amount. They were losing guys early in the season, but they weren't lost for the full season, right? They were missing 2 or 3 weeks here and there. So I think that's, if you're looking for hope for this year for this 49ers team, that's maybe the way to look at it. Again, I'm not saying that they're going to be the 2019 team. I'm just saying that the blueprint of what went right for that team is going to have to be similar to what it would be for this team to have a good season.
Yeah. If I gave you like uh, like a telescope, you could only watch one 49ers player. You spent an hour at practice this week, one of the days. Like, which one would you watch the whole practice?
Boy, that's a good question. I think I'd probably would go Renardo Green, actually.
Okay.
And he had a really interesting day yesterday. And I know he was kind of on the wrong end of some of those Juwan Jennings catches from Brock Purdy. Again, not making too much of this. Renardo Green is a guy who is a physical player, and playing press is a big part of his game. You can't do that when you're not in pads and not even wearing helmets for chunks of this. So he's at an inherent disadvantage, as most of the defense is at this time of year. But I do think that, the way they are trying to line up that defensive backfield is in a way that they're going to have Diamador Lenore, if they can, keep him outside. And if that's the case, then I think a lot of teams are going to try to target Renardo Green. And when I watched Green last year, especially in camp, I made note of it a few times. I said, he's really talented. He's sticky in coverage. He's a little bit handsy, though. He gets, I could see where he'd be a guy who racks up some penalties. And he did that early when he first started playing, but he got better as the year went on. Those penalty numbers came down, and he wasn't getting the flags as much. But I think he is going to be a kind of a sneaky key to this defense. And I also think, we talk about this run defense and how bad it was last year. Even particularly when you look at terms of like EPA for opponents when they're on rushing plays, they were, I think, 28th in the league or something like that. But I think they struggled to set edges, but they also didn't get as much run support from the corners as they usually do. And I think that was something that was kind of underrated, that was missing. But so that's someone who I think maybe not even just through OTAs, but as we get into training camp, if he can take that big leap from year one to year two, they have a really nice combination of young corners on the outside there,
Yeah.
and they could be set up well to actually make some plays and get some takeaways, because as we know, toward the end of last year, that was non-existent.
Isn't it funny? Like it feels like a polar opposite group in the secondary from a physical, from a height standpoint, to like the
Yeah.
early solid defense, right? Which was all those Seahawks guys.
Yeah, it is. It's like a tougher, spicier. That's not to say the previous guys were tough, but just like the makeup of those guys, that kind of mentality that they're looking for seems to have overtaken. It's intangibles over tangibles in some ways, and I think Diamador Lenore actually really opened the door for that, because you take a guy like Diamador Lenore in the fifth round. You're not going to get the measurables. Like a guy like him, if he had the measurables, is going way earlier than that. But
Ambry Thomas.
Ambry Thomas, right? Or even Akello Witherspoon, right? Like
Yeah.
second round, like guys like that. And so I guess Akello was third, but still, I think when a guy like Lenore comes in and he doesn't meet those height, weight, speed requirements, whatever it is, and he has the success that he has, it opens your eyes a little bit to, hey, like, we can have success with these types of guys. Let's look for the makeup more so than necessarily these measurables. And Robert Saleh knows too. DJ Reed is another good example.
Right.
Look at what he's done, the career that he's carved out for himself. That's one that I know John Lynch still kicks himself over the way that ended here. So I think they've certainly opened their eyes. And there's other positions where they are way more stringent on that, as we know. Looking at you, offensive line, offensive tackle, but yeah, certainly at corner, I think they've kind of opened their arms a little bit to just guys who fit what they're looking for from an intangibles standpoint, more so than just measurables.
It does feel like too. You go back to even you go back several years. It feels like their safeties. They're like, oh god, they don't really have like coverage safeties. They have run support safeties, but they just keep there's. It feels like there was something philosophical there where they really. And this year that could really matter, especially if Jair Brown and Malik Mustafa can get healthy by the, but it's like, it does feel like there's something philosophical there with them, when maybe a lot of it's rare to see two safeties that, and correct me if you think this is incorrect, but it feels like they are better run supporters than they are coverage guys.
Yeah, and, I think when they drafted Jair Brown, that wasn't necessarily how they envisioned him. He made a
Mm.
lot of plays on the ball in college at Penn State. What do you have, like 8 interceptions his last year or something like that at Penn State? He was a bit more of a playmaker, but I think part of this, is especially you talk about philosophically in the draft. This is not a team that spends high draft picks on the secondary. They just haven't done it. I mean, Renardo Green is the highest drafted guy that they've taken in the secondary since they've got here, I believe. You correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that was the highest, which was a late second round pick. And beyond that, they're not drafting guys in the secondary before the third round, which kind of lends itself to, again, you're not necessarily going to check all the boxes in terms of the measurables and things like that. So I think it's become more of just a situation of like, what are we looking for in terms of the intangibles? Are these guys who are tough and physical and all those kinds of things? And also, other teams aren't necessarily looking to draft guys super early. You don't see safeties, a big run of safeties until you get into those middle rounds. And I think that's where the 49ers feel like they can find guys. Obviously, Hufanga is a success story from the fifth round and things like that. So I think all of that kind of plays into it when you're talking about, philosophically what they're doing in the secondary.
Yeah, Renardo Green was picked 64. Witherspoon was picked 66. So
There you go.
pretty
There you
close.
go. Yeah.
Where are you with this offensive line? I mean, this is not the time of year where we can tell much, but it is, it is jarring. It reminds me last year when Aiyuk was holding out and, at training camp and Pearsall wasn't available initially. And the receiver group was just like, it was Debo and Jennings. And then like the first week of OTAs, you're like, oh gosh, without Aiyuk or Pearsall, it's Jennings essentially. And that's kind of what it's like, feels like a little bit watching the offensive line group without Trent Williams, with Spencer Burford at left. You can just see how quickly they get past their depth. It's immediate, right? They get past their depth at O-line this year.
Yeah, I think it's still a huge question mark, and I understand to some extent why they didn't address it as heavily as people like myself might have wanted them to or thought they should, because they had to address the defensive line in that way. But I also think that the way that this offseason unfolded sets up a scenario where we could very well next year at this time, Guy, be talking about a team that used the draft next year on the offensive line like they did this year on the defensive line, right? Where you're drafting multiple guys and you're spending, a first round pick, a third round pick, early draft picks to rebuild the offensive line because you got Colton McKivitz, who's going to be an unrestricted free agent after this year. People can say what you want. Colton McKivitz, it was a solid player last year. He's gotten better in his time there. But if Jalen Moore is getting $15 million a year as the swing tackle, what's Colton McKivitz going to get on the open market? 17, 18? You can't rule that out. If he has another solid year, there's a real possibility of that. I would argue Colton McKivitz is, at least last year, was a much better player than Aaron Banks. And Aaron Banks, we saw what he got. So if you want to look at it like that, that's probably going to be a position they're going to have to replace, because if they weren't willing to pay Mike McGlinchey 18 million a year, it was a first round pick. I don't think they're going to do that for Colton McKivitz if that's where his market goes. So you've got that. You've got center, which is still a question mark. I think a lot of people would have liked to have seen, a competition brought in for Jake Brendel this year. That didn't happen. Matt Hennessy is here. So, they did kind of the weird thing where you don't see it often, signing a guy to a 2-year deal in December, which tells you they at least think there's something there. Maybe he does end up competing for that job, but they seem pretty committed to Jake Brendel. But beyond this year, I'm not sure that that's going to be the case. Left guard, as we sit here right now, Ben Barch is probably the guy, but we don't know. There's no answer there. And then Trent Williams, it's definitely, I don't think he's in a hurry to retire, but it's definitely a year-to-year proposition. So, and that's just your starters. That doesn't even get into, like you said, the depth, the lack of depth, and they don't have a swing tackle that you feel great about. Spencer Burford is your swing tackle right now, probably. That's not a great sign. They signed a couple of guys, Nicholas Petit-Frere and Andre Dillard, but neither of those guys has had much success. Maybe people recognize the name. Obviously, those guys are available in May for a reason. So there's all these different kinds of things going on there, and they've done a good job of kind of patching it together. But I would still argue that in multiple Super Bowls now, they've had breakdowns at the worst times, and you could even say in the NFC Championship game against the Rams that they lost a few years ago, same type of situation. To me, I think it would be wise for them to invest more. I know they're not going to go spend the big money in free agency, but at least in the draft, start taking swings on guys. I mean, some of the guys we just named are fifth round picks. Colton McKivitz, Jalen Moore, those are solid players, but at least have those guys in the building. And so that if you do get in a situation where you have injuries like you did last year, you have options, and they haven't really done that. So it's a long-winded answer, but I don't think it's really kind of any breaking any new ground that this offensive line is still going to be under the microscope, particularly if they make a run and they get into some of those big games in January, because they seem to be able to sustain before that.
You bring up what was a big storyline this time last year, remember, was does Brock Purdy get any more control at the line of scrimmage coming out of the Super Bowl where Spencer Burford makes the mistake on the third down and Chris Jones gets free, and then the Niners don't pick up the corner pressure and their third down around midfield, to Aiyuk, it basically gets batted down. It's an uncatchable pass. And that storyline has kind of died because, I've heard quarterbacks say, no, I actually like this takes a lot of pressure off of your plate. And, there was the story last year, Matt Ryan said, oh God, or Kirk Cousins said, I tried it for Kyle Shanahan, I think told the story on maybe it was to Kawakami, like Kirk Cousins was like, yeah, I'll do it. And then after a week was like, I don't want that responsibility. but where are you at on that? Is there any evolution to be had on that front for Brock Purdy, or is this just the way it operates for Kyle Shanahan's Niners?
Yeah, I mean, I think that if it's going to happen, now would be the time, right? Because now Brock Purdy is essentially locked in as your guy for the foreseeable future, and if you want to start giving him a little bit more freedom to do things, he can do that. I don't necessarily see that as something that's going to become part and parcel of this offense, right? Like I think Brock Purdy is fine with doing it the way he does because there's options that are built into the play call, right? So if he knows that if it's this is what it's supposed to be. If that gets taken away, then you come to this. And so if I think it's two play calls on every play call anyway, right? So he does have the freedom to kind of vacillate between those two, depending on the look that he gets. I think what you saw last year in terms of the freedom, if we're talking about freedom that Brock Purdy has, it was more of not necessarily within the concept of the play call, but in the terms of being able to take off and run if he wants to do more of that. And I think that is where you could continue to see maybe something a little bit different as the years goes on. I'm not saying he's going to turn into prime Michael Vick where he's running for 900 to 1,000 yards every year or anything like that. But I think he ran for like 365 last year, I think something like that, and a few touchdowns. So I wouldn't be surprised if he kind of pushes that number and then maybe into the 400s or something like that. Obviously, playing a full season would probably get him there last year anyway. But I think that is probably maybe more likely where you're going to see continued evolution for him. And I think that's the other thing, Guy. We talked about Brock Purdy. He still doesn't have that many starts in the NFL. It's a fair amount now, enough that there's a sample size here, but there is still
36.
there's still a possibility for him to get better. Like
Yeah.
there still is room for growth there, and I think kind of picking his spots and knowing when to do those things is a big part of that.
Yeah, no, I mean that was part of last year. Remember, it was his first healthy offseason, and that's definitely part of this year too. Nothing's ever been, no Aiyuk for most of the offseason last year, no Aiyuk, and now no Ricky Pearsall. You'd love to see him get healthy fully by training camp. So it feels like there's an opportunity for him here without Aiyuk out there, and you hope he can take advantage of it. But
Yeah, and then the Pearsall thing kind of caught us by surprise. It's funny because he last year missed even before the unfortunate shooting incident that happened. He did miss big chunks of time in the offseason program. But the flip side of that is when aside from the shooting, he hasn't missed games, and he didn't miss games in college either. So it may be one of those things where sometimes you're having to deal with short-term things, but he is at least available on Sundays, which is the most important thing. But for him, this training camp is huge because, like you just pointed out, there is a lot of opportunity there for him to step into a bigger role. And frankly, the Niners need him to because they just don't have a lot of proven talent at receiver right now. And this is all part of Brock Purdy too, right? Like that's one of the things I was laughing about with this whole the kerfluffle over to TJ Hushmanzada's quotes the other day, right? Like everyone was making a big deal about. And then what did he say? He said Brock's a $47 million quarterback, but not a 53. I like it was just so granular. I was like, what are we talking? Like, what? How do you even determine this? But the funny thing is Brandon Ayuk, who's his guy, had his best year, the year that got him 30 million bucks a year with Brock Purdy throwing in the ball. So I'm sure the $6 million difference Brandon Ayuk's probably okay with
Yeah.
because of what it garnered for him. So, but this is definitely a situation now where Brock Purdy doesn't have to carry the freight for the whole team. But I certainly think that when you get that contract, there is inherent expectations that say, okay, you're gonna have to be a little bit more of the main guy here.
Yeah. Well, and McCaffrey being available feels like the whole thing. There's really
Yeah,
two questions on Christian, right? It's like, is he there for 16, 17 games? And then what is he when he's there? Like,
right. Yeah,
he is trying to defy the odds now, given his age. Forget about, and then you add to it the PCL and the Achilles.
Achilles. Yeah, it's a huge thing, and it's funny because you can, on one hand, you can look at it and you can say he's only a year removed from being the offensive player of the year. Like, why wouldn't he be able to do that? On the other hand, you can look at it and say, well, he just went through all these things. He's approaching 30, and he's a running back, and there are examples of running backs, special running backs who played well into their 30s. But there's not many of them, even great ones like Christian McCaffrey, who, once they kind of hit that wall, and whether it was injury related or just age or a combination of the two, they fell off the cliff. And so, like, we could sit here, and I know a lot of people right now are arguing about Christian McCaffrey and how good he looked or didn't look at OTAs yesterday. That doesn't matter. And the real answer is nobody knows. I don't know. You don't know. He doesn't know what he's going to look like when the season gets here. And so having a full off season certainly can be helpful for him. But I think it's fair to wonder if he can get back to that level. If he can, to your point, it will go a long way in getting this offense where it needs to go and this team where it needs to go. And if he can't, they're going to have to figure it out. And last year, they struggled to do that because it wasn't just him. It was literally every other running back that played had injury issues at some point. But there is no replacing Christian McCaffrey. There's not one guy that can do that. The hope is that you don't have to.
Yeah. By the way, one question for you. I was recently at the Country Music Hall of Fame in Nashville, and I came across, and I know your name is Wagoner. We've talked about this. It's pronounced Wagner. There's also, I don't know if this guy spells it Wagner or says it Wagner or Wagoner. Maybe Porter from Country Music Hall of Fame.
I'd have all the riches my pockets could hold.
I have never heard of or seen that man before in my life. No, I don't. I don't think so. But the fact that he's singing with Dolly Parton right there, I mean, that's she's that is a long time ago. It looks like so.
You should look into this. You might have rights to the coat that he's wearing here. This could be a family heirloom.
I will. I'll get it and I'll wear it on SportsCenter sometime. Yeah, just for you, guy.
Okay, so no relation to Country
Not that
Music
I'm
Hall of
aware
Fame.
of. Not that I'm aware of. No.
If what was the line? If tears were pennies and heartache was gold, I'd have all the riches that my home could hold, or something. So there you go.
That's good wisdom from Porter there.
It is interesting, like songwriter, writer.
Yeah. Not a reach at all, guy.
You put, like, here's the thing for people to understand. I mean, people who watch this a lot of people follow you on Twitter. You put like 500 words on X after every practice, which is a service. I mean, it truly is a service. I'm not sure why you choose to do it. I didn't mean it like there's a reason to or not.
It's fine. We can talk about it.
It's a lot of work, and it's a service, and it's really good. It's if I miss a practice, I go there first, and it's just like, bam, there's everything I need.
Well, I appreciate that, and that's kind of what I'm going for. So here's the thing: like, I don't make any money off of Twitter. It's not like you say, it is not necessarily anything that benefits me in any way. But I will say this: I obviously at every practice, the first thing I do is I take attendance, right? So who's there, who's not there, who's working on the side. I have little ways to denote everything. So once I do that, then I take notes throughout the course of the practice. And training camp, I will pay much closer attention to like what's actually happening on the field and detailed notes on play by play and all that kind of stuff. But the great thing about it is, if you ever saw my notes from a practice. So some of this is on the sheet. They hand us a sheet that's the roster, right? So I take attendance on there. And then I'll make notes in the margins, right? This is for an OTA practice. During camp, I'll actually write in a notebook. But then I am also someone who I dislike clutter. So I don't like electronic filth. Like my email box is always as clean as possible, and I don't like pieces of paper laying around, like all that kind of stuff. So the beauty of it is the win for me out of this is that I can copy those notes onto Twitter. I can post them, everyone can see them, and then I can throw the little roster sheet away for that day, right? So like it's a win-win in that sense. And also I have a log. So if I need to go back and look at like what happened on this day in practice or what was the last week like, I can go back through it and just find it on Twitter. So that's part of why I did. The selfish part of why I do it is so that I could throw my trash away in the proper place. And then also I like that it is an opportunity to take fans where they can't go, which is really what our whole job is, right? Like I want you to feel like you were there. I want you to be able to draw your own conclusions. I don't I don't like to make sweeping judgments or opinions off of individual practices anyway, but I like to give people just kind of the nuts and bolts of this is what happened. Here's a little thing that I might have observed that somebody else might not have. And then they can draw their own conclusions however they want. And that's my whole approach to it.
It's fascinating to see people's process, and it requires a lot of discipline. And I know it's honed. That type of process is honed over years and years. So, Nick, thanks, man. Always great to talk to you.
You got it. See you, bud.